Okay, happy New Year's, everyone. Steve, thank you for joining me. Totally excited to have you all on LinkedIn Live again, and first one of 2022, and talk about some predictions for 2022.
No lack of material in this bucket, Janine, at all, right? Holy smokes. Well, I'm honored to be your first guest of the year. This is great.
Yes, and it's a great continuation. We've had some great conversations in the past. For those folks who don't know Steve, formerly lots of executive roles in talent and HR, but previously was the head of talent at LinkedIn, taking them from 400 to 4,000 employees, and is quite the guru. He's one of Emtrain's experts too on talent. And currently is quite the expert on all talent strategies at Cadigan Ventures. So please check him out. Check out his website. But today we're going to talk about 2022 predictions, and I kind of drafted a bit of a post just last week on it's the world turned upside down. And Steve, I thought maybe we'd talk about a few of these predictions that I think both of us are seeing. And let's start off with, we're going into our third year of the pandemic. People are impacted both mentally, both physically. Along with that, we've got some social and economic changes that have been happening for a while, but the pandemic has accelerated. So that's causing some changes in our workforce too. But let's start with the obvious one, which is the need for wellness and caring and support. Maybe I'll just start us off with the basics, and then Steve
Great.
talk about like the talent implications. So, the basics. For those of you who don't know, I started my career as an employment lawyer, advisor, litigator. 16 years ago today, I actually stopped practicing law as a litigator, and I started Emtrain to actually be a little bit more proactive and more of a support for leaders and employees and businesses. But I do know from my employment lawyer perspective that ADA, FMLA, and reasonable accommodations are concepts that not many people leaders are really comfortable with. And now is the time to become more comfortable with those concepts. So I think we're going to see an increasing number of people needing to take leave, both for physical issues, mental issues, and people leaders maybe proactively should be starting to think about, okay, what does this mean? What are the employee protections that I need to be aware of? And then more broadly, what's the organizational perspective on how we support and care for our workforce? Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, at a macro level, I really resonate with this being a very hot topic for every talent leader I talk to around the world, not just in the US, which is this is the top of the agenda. I spent time in many HR, dark rooms planning for 2022, and wellness was almost at the top, if not the top of the list for everybody. How can we create safe work environments? How can we be more aware of providing an environment where people feel they can do their best work, wherever that is, right? And so I think you're absolutely right. Dusting off our awareness of FMLA, but also what I'm starting to see, and what I'm encouraging a lot of my clients to consider is, how do we get in front of this so that someone doesn't get to the point where things are broken in their work life
Mm-hmm.
that they need to take some time off? Can we offer more coaching, counseling? Mental health awareness has really risen up a lot on a global scale, which is, I think, a really good thing. The destigmatization of that, the recognition of anxiety,
Yeah.
particularly triggered by people who've never worked from home before, and unfortunately. The first thing you do is, well, if no one's seeing me do my work, I probably need to work more so that it gets recognized, and that can cause a death spiral, as you know. So that begs for me the strategy of making sure that we're actively getting to know how our people are doing. We're actively promoting what their rights are and what the options are. We're actively building guardrails so they don't run off a cliff,
Yeah.
with burnout. And that's hard because we're not in a steady state right now. Even recording this, the beginning of 2022, almost 2 years in, the ground still isn't firm. We're still learning new things about Omicron and how it spreads and how it doesn't spread and how virulent it is. And so that makes making decisions hard when you don't have clear data to work with. But I think I do feel it's been a good opportunity for organizations to get smarter, more educated around building a wellness strategy that can extend well beyond where we are today.
Exactly. And I would love to see, and I would hope to see that organizations decentralize it. So it's the direct people leaders that feel comfortable sharing the messages, because let's face it, people, I think, have more comfort with the people that they actually have relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, share a message centrally from the business leader and from heads of people and heads of culture, but at the same time have the direct people leaders checking in with everyone on their team, and actually proactively saying, hey, there might come a time as we go through this year that somebody needs to leave. Here's what we have, and just know about this proactively.
Right, right. I'm seeing some organizations have the CEO send a note saying, "I'm taking a mental health day today,"
Yeah, I love that.
to unplug.
Yeah.
Using that by example and leading by example, and that I think is it's well received by the organizations where something like that happens. Every organization is going through different challenges right now. If you're depending upon how the pandemic has impacted your work. But I agree with you. I mean, really being thoughtful around a wellness strategy. We used to think of wellness as in terms of the fitness center. Do you remember
Right.
those days,
Yes,
Janine?
yes, yes.
And now it's like, should we have on-site
Counseling.
counseling? And how do we detect early signs of us needing to pay attention?
Right, totally. And just to finish this off, I'll put my lawyer hat on and be pretty technical, just because I just want people to have this on their radar. And this kind of catches folks actually knowing how to engage in the interactive process, actually having a conversation, which just means having a conversation. It's a violation in and of itself. I remember decades ago, there were cases upon cases, huge dockets, and the whole infraction was managers not having a conversation, and that generated a whole lawsuit. So, hate to be so legal about it, but
Yeah.
it is a thing, and I want people to be mindful of it.
Yeah, Gina, I have a question for you on this. You pointed out in your post, which everyone should read because it's a great post, that a lot of these protections were implemented around 30 years ago. Do you
Yes.
think what we're going through right now may generate some new legislation and some new protections? Because that legislation, FML, wasn't built for the kind of world we're living in right now. And I wonder if we're going to see. I don't know. Are you seeing anything that makes you think we're going to see new kinds of legislation and protections?
So I actually, so they have expanded and broadened the language of the statute, which is what they do with most statutes. It's pretty
Hmm.
broad and pretty applicable. Um, what I am actually excited to see is, this most kind of recent generation of business leaders and people leaders approach it in a different way. So when it was first passed, basically 25, almost 30 years ago, I think companies were very top down and kind of like providing the bare minimum that the
Right,
law
right,
required. And I think we have
right.
we have a new attitude these days. And I think we know it's like it's a matter of supporting people to get the best, as opposed to like kind of like squelching people
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see how businesses and business leaders approach this. I think, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. I think what I expect to see more and more of is required disclosures,
Hmm.
but we'll get there.
Okay.
Let's talk about management actions being under a microscope. And Steve, why don't you start us off with, because I know you had a post that went viral about the Better.com situation, the
Right.
layoff, and I think we've seen a few of these that have kind of
Yeah.
become nightmares for folks.
Well, I have to tell you, I am so fortunate that most of my HR career was before social media, really, before before Glassdoor was really there. And I really have empathy for leaders who,
It's hard.
you're being measured, you're being watched, you're being filmed, you're being captured in ways that we've never prepared for. And so expect everything you do. One CEO I work with says every email I write, I expect that will stand up if it gets out in the public. And
Totally.
so that's not to mean you shouldn't be candid, you shouldn't be honest, you shouldn't be direct, but you should be aware, right? And I think that the what we're seeing right now is the migration of employee power like we've never seen before, in terms of more choices, more opportunities, more resignations than we've ever seen before. And so what people are expecting from their leadership teams, and this is only going to continue, I believe, for foreseeable future, is we expect more. We expect social responsibility. We expect more transparency. We are not going to just sit down if you do something that's really objectionable. And that reaction that we saw at the better, I call it better.not situation, really triggered that. And it wasn't just the impacted employees, it was the people who weren't let go. It was
Right.
the whole ecosystem of people like, what? How you, not just what you did, but, and this brings up the other thing that I think, management actions under a microscope. I have a lot of grace for leaders because I've been in that situation where we've had to, business is down. We're going to have to let someone go. We're going to have to close an office, a region, whatever. And it's never about, it's never easy. And so what I want to remind leaders, because you're going to continue to face impossible decisions that we've never prepared for, is it's not just what the decision is, it's how you make the decision, how you collect input, how you gather feedback from people. You could, on the one hand, just go to the top of the mountain, come down with a tablet and say, this is what we decided. And be like, well, who'd you talk to? Or you can gather feedback. And I find if you do that, even if it's not the answer people wanted to hear, the receptivity and the digestion of that will be much better because they had a chance to air their thoughts about it. And so that's how I see your actions are going to be more under the microscope, but there's some mitigating things you can do to, and this gets into a huge topic for us, trust.
Yeah.
The organizations, I did acquisitions at Cisco for 4 years. We did 50 deals when I was there. And what we found was it's one of the most turbulent organization changes any organization can go through. You get gobbled up by someone, and maybe you saw it coming, maybe you didn't, and everything's up for grabs. Do I have a job? Is my comp changing? Is my boss changing? Is all this stuff? Are my benefits the same? And what we found was where we weathered those the best is where the employees trusted their leadership. And where we didn't was when there was a new leader in, or there was a change management team, or private equity had just wiped out the whole executive team. There wasn't any trust, and it was pure chaos. So I think your ability to weather these really turbulent undercurrents and tides and waters that we're sailing in right now is going to be dependent upon how much trust you build.
Yeah, no, thank you, Steve. I love that. And I think you and I had said before we started our conversation this morning that it's not so much the what, it's the how. And so, as you were saying, it's just taking a little bit more time to like think through how you're going to like kind of package up and
Right.
message to everyone the how you arrived at your decision. Because let's face it, usually an individual contributor doesn't see all the different issues, and it's super easy for folks to think that the business leader made a poor decision. They don't realize how hard it is and how many different, priorities there are.
Yes.
So taking the extra time, maybe getting a few different perspectives, weighing in, seeing how it looks from all angles, and making sure that it's packaged, that the how you came to that decision is packaged nicely so people can see the work that was put into it.
Let me give you a quick example. We had a point during the huge war for talent, 2010, where our San Francisco employees, we were headquartered in Mountain View, were just demanding a bus. We need a bus, and we have to have it. And all our competitors, Google has it, and all these other firms have it. Why don't we have a bus? And I said, okay, I'll take a look into it. So I took a look into it and found out that less than 20% of our employees lived in San Francisco. It was probably like 15. That 2 buses twice a day was $250,000. And I researched that, and I presented it to all the people who wanted to in a town hall. I said, okay, this is important to a very vocal minority. And I said, look at how many of you are there. Look where everyone else is. The people who are, commuting from Gilroy aren't complaining. The people who are commuting from,
Oh,
Los Banos aren't complaining.
yeah.
And this is $250,000. We're not making the profit. Do you think that's smart use of our money to spend $250,000 for 10%, 15% of the population? And they said, yeah, probably not. Thank you for looking at it. We understand. Boom.
That's
Right.
awesome. Yeah.
And there were still people pissed off about it, but I was like, here, I did the homework. I would like to meet your needs, but I'm looking at the whole community here, not just you, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. That perfectly illustrates, I think what we're talking about here is just like
Mhm.
doing the homework, packaging it up and sharing it with everyone.
Cool.
So that kind of, I think, leads us to, the point where I think there is going to be some more regulation this year and next year. I think we've reached a tipping point in terms of our social issues and social conditions of our population are changing, where people are demanding increased transparency, because transparency builds accountability, right? And so, Steve, looping back to your comment about trust, and
Mhm.
people are looking for trust, and you get trust by transparency and accountability. Transparency plus accountability yields trust.
Yep.
And, we have not been all that successful leaving it to corporate America and corporations globally to, on their own initiative, share their demographic composition,
Mhm.
their pay practices per classification, and the demographics, per classification, their board composition, which has lots of
Mhm.
implications. Their you know stats about their claims, their harassment claims, their discrimination claims. That's
Mhm.
all on the table this year.
It is. It is. And it gets at this notion that we talked about earlier, which is the employees really have a lot more power right now than at any time that we've been looking at this
Yeah.
topic. And I think that's going to give them the opportunity to ask for more. And I don't want to work at your firm because you don't have the representation on your board or in your company that I think you should, or you're not making as good an effort as you could, or I don't like how you closed that factory down and replaced all the striking workers. I mean, there's all kinds of actions that we're seeing play out in the workforce that I think are going to lead to more requirements for accountability. We already saw a lot in the last 2 years, right, Janine, relative to diversity and representation,
Mhm.
particularly on boards. And you and I both being in California, we've seen a lot of this, and but we haven't seen many companies voluntarily offer the demographic data and talk about that. I know it's been something people have discussed, but I don't know that we've seen real action, meaningful action, result in as widespread a
I,
positive change as we'd like to see in this area.
I agree. I think we're going to start to see it more, and this kind of blends into our next topic here. But California this year implemented for all California employers that have headquarters here, they have to start reporting their pay data per classification and show demographic data. Right?
Mhm.
California influences the rest of the country. We've seen that with the harassment training mandate.
Mhm.
California has some implications for everyone else.
Mhm.
So between that rule, the California board rule, the California board rule, insisting that public boards have at least one woman, one person of color on their board, I
Mhm.
think directly influenced the NASDAQ rule and the SEC rule that requires the same.
Mhm.
So we're going to see more of that,
Mhm.
and getting into kind of this balance of power between management versus employees. I think we're the cycle has completed a full rotation, and I think for
Right.
a long time, management had more power, frankly, in many ways. Yes, there was always the war for talent, employee engagement, but when it came to kind of nuts and bolts, management had more power in terms of its
Mhm.
leadership practices, management practices, and I think that's starting to really change. And that
Mhm.
goes into, I think, our next point, Steve, of employees have a higher bar. They're mobilizing more. They have a higher bar than we've seen in the last 30 years.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think that's going to change. We saw some really interesting things come out of Europe this year too, in this work from home adjustment. That in Portugal, for example, there was a mandate that you cannot make your work from home staff work beyond a certain number of
Mhm.
hours. Like you
Mhm.
cannot, you're forbidden to do that. And I don't know how you implement that or how you measure it, but we're seeing some nations who are more employee protectionist
Mhm.
start to implement some pretty interesting practices as we adjust to this new world of work that keeps presenting us new challenges. But I do think the number of union efforts that we've seen, attempts to unionize, and some succeed, some haven't, has really forced the issue of the topics that we talked about, like, well, how transparent are you with your decisions, and how are you doing the right things? And I'm not here to suggest that unionizing is the right answer, but that is, I think, something that's generated from discontent
Of
with how
course.
people are feeling they're being treated, right? And in the case of Amazon, for example, that I believe it was Alabama, there was one of their first big distribution centers had a big vote, and it turned out, and there's a great podcast about this. It turned out that it was the founding members of this drive to unionize were generated because they kept having issues they wanted to talk to someone about, and they were kept being told, call this 800 number and speak to an AI interface.
Yeah.
Which gets back to the other thing we talked about earlier around, if any organization out there thinks that outsourcing your human resources, outsourcing benefit questions is a good idea to build trust, I
Right.
think you're wrong. And I'm sorry, because I have a lot of friends that work for some of these outsourced HR providers. I'm sorry, but you're missing that conversation. When someone comes and says, hey, what's our leave policy? That's
Right.
a clue that you're not getting if you've outsourced it. If you're
Right.
in there and someone comes and says, Steve, what's our leave policy? Flag, hey, are you okay? What's
Yeah. What's
going
going
on?
on? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
So
interesting.
I totally agree, and I think that to me the takeaway here is not that, oh no, 2022 is going to be when all the employees mobilize and are activists. It's more, I think that's missing the point. I think the point is, 2022 is that watershed inflection point when more of the workforce than less has a pretty high bar in terms of what their expectations are. And it's time for leadership to understand that in a really intrinsic way and be proactive about it. Realize that probably more than 50% of your workforce is expecting you to be transparent about what's going on, about what the demographics are, what the composition is there social justice happening, equity and fairness happening within the workforce. And to the extent that you don't prioritize that communication, you will not have trust. You won't, you'll have the workforce feeling a lack of trust.
Mhm.
And that's a bad place to be.
Totally. 100%.
Um, so with everything that we're talking about here, where we've got a focus on health and wellness, management actions, under the microscope, increased, I think, disclosures and need for transparency, and a higher bar, all that's set against the higher bar. I know there have been some discussions lately about this, but for me, this is like the big takeaway. I think that the number one workplace skill in 2022 is, you know, pro-social skills, and how do we create a whole environment to really up level not just people leaders, but really all employees on their pro-social skills, to understand that it's the chemistry between us and the social connections between us that either create a high performing team, or conversely a team where there's just a whole lot of friction and we're just like a tire spinning in the mud.
Yeah, and it's really challenged, Janine, because we're not together
Right.
as much as we were. And we've not learned yet, to the extent that I think we can, how do we build chemistry, camaraderie, teamwork in a more remote reality? And I think no one believes that we're going to be back all together in one place tomorrow. So let's do what we can. I call this sort of the era of experimentation. We got to experiment. And it's not always about getting it right. I think we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to learn. And I think what your team wants to know is that you're trying. you're putting effort in to try to get this right for them, for you, for the organization, for your shareholders, and it's going to be a little bit sloppy. And I really think, yeah, our human nature, particularly as Americans, like we want to get it right. There's got to be one answer,
Right.
and there is no one answer right now. It's going
Mm-mm.
to be hybrid. It's going to be work from home. It's going to be going to the office. It's going to be all the above. And the more you can wrap your head around not focusing on one, and really, as you said, culture and trust are at the core here. I think we're going to continue to see a high degree of turnover this year. But so don't feel like you're going to be disappointed, or don't be hurt if someone leaves. They're going to leave. So what are you going to do to try to prepare yourself so that there's less of a single point of failure if people go? And what can you do to sort of help support that person on their journey? I think the tolerance for bad leadership is at an all-time high right now. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, the intolerance for bad leadership
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, all time low. Yeah.
they're gonna vote with their feet, and we're seeing that like in record numbers.
Yeah.
Record numbers of new startups have been founded in the last 2 years. Record number of resignations. There's a lot of people that believe, and I think I'm in that camp. When these end of the year bonuses get paid in January, February,
Oh
or
boy.
maybe they already were, there's going to be a lot of people saying, "Okay, I was waiting for that. Now I'm gonna make a move." So I think we got to brace ourselves. It's not going to be clean in 2022. It's not. It's going to still be turbulent. And I have a lot of grace for leaders that are trying to juggle all this, but focus on the trust, focus on increasing communication. I think it's the best that we can do right now.
Oh, totally agree, Steve. And I'd say focus on what I call the pro-social behaviors. And I just mentioned that because it's just so easy to deprioritize those and focus on like the technical things that need to get done.
Right.
But without those social connections between people, it just the trust falls down.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting on this projection for 2022. Did we say anything about technology?
No,
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 human connection. This is
no.
the
It's human
shiny
connection.
object that we all sort of fall, prey to, like, oh, the seduction that the solution to our problems has got to be some new system, some new shiny tool. And you and I just, just
Yeah,
became
that's
apparent
good.
to me as we're wrapping up here that this is really about human connection. And they're, any tools that you use, if they're not fostering that, I would deprioritize it right now, you know?
Love that. Okay, so 2022 is all about the human connection.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, so the article is discussion of the year. Appreciate that.
It's been great,
And
Janine. Yep.
yep. Thank you so much, everyone, and happy New Year. And till the next discussion. Have a good day. Are we off?